All right, guys, today's pricing. We are almost through the program. We've got 4 sessions left. So again, today's pricing, I made some adjustments to the schedule. So just some housekeeping stuff for you guys. So the next session is on M&A and integrations. That's tomorrow. And it's going to talk about, especially in platform companies, how to bring things together on the marketing side. I ended up combining the December 10th and 11th session on team and budget together, because I think team, budget, board meetings, they all kind of go together, and you're going to see a lot of content that overlaps there. And then I added an extra session on career progression, because especially for you guys, as you're leveling up in your marketing careers and moving into the CMO role, are already a CMO and thinking about your next step, I think career progression is just one of those things that doesn't get talked about enough. So we'll talk about things like salary benchmarking and how to make progress through different companies and different roles and things like that. And I have some thoughts on that for you guys as well. So I want to make sure you leave the program with that, at least as you think about your next steps. So with that said, the goal, like always, with every session is to get you to think like a C-level marketer. And we're going to do this by focusing on C-level marketing topics, strategic concepts that actually help you think like CEOs and boards and interface with folks like that. And we won't be focusing on tactics and campaigns and functional activities. Today's topic is pricing. And I'd say pricing is one of those things that, we could do a whole course on pricing. We could release like a C-level pricing course, and it would have like 10 modules and all the different complexities involved with that. So I've done my best to cram the fundamentals into today's session, but there's just so much more on this topic that I think there are a lot of resources out there as well. Like Patrick Campbell, he's a friend and he's done a ton of work on it in this space too. I think there's a lot of his content to go through, and there's a couple of other firms out there that I would recommend you guys check out. One in particular would be Simon Kucher. They do a ton of pricing work for private equity, and they have a ton of content out there on pricing. So there are a lot of resources on this topic, but where I thought we could take this session in terms of the how to SaaS way of looking at this is for you guys as marketers to really understand the dynamics of pricing and how it impacts your role as a marketer, because that type of stuff is not out there as much. And it's a little bit different to prepare you to be able to do that. So I want to talk about some of the fundamental concepts and then get into like actual implementation and the role that marketing has to play. So with that, setting the stage in that way, this is like the traditional marketing mix that used to be taught in business schools everywhere. I don't know if it still is, but it's called the 4 Ps of marketing. If you've been to business school, you've probably seen this or something like this, which is product, price, place, promotion is, the drum they beat in marketing classes there. But it turns out that nobody actually runs their company this way, unless you're like in the CPG space, maybe, where maybe as you're putting stuff on the shelf, you're deciding on price. I feel like this model was built in that traditional retail world. But in B2B companies, I find that it looks more like this in most companies, where product partially controls the price, and maybe sales based on the deals that they're seeing, the contracts that are outstanding will have a role to play. But marketing in general, the role is relegated to these other domains. And so marketing in general doesn't get plugged into pricing discussions. Very rarely there's a pricing committee, and marketing might have a seat in there, but sometimes even then it doesn't. And so I feel like this is a missed opportunity. And as you guys think about making an impact inside your companies, like pricing is just such a huge lever that you guys being a part of those discussions is going to be valuable. And also thinking about how that connects to all other areas of your domain and your function, and connecting that through to overall growth levers like we've discussed. And for me, like pricing impacts everything. It's your business model, it's your product marketing, it's how you go to market, it's how you expand existing customers. And we've talked about some of these things, especially when we talk about ACV and TAM and which channels are more. I think this channel matrix comes to mind that I've shown you guys this many times over, where certain channels are more important when your ACV is higher and other channels are less important, and vice versa. And so it affects all areas of what we do. And so marketers need to be plugged into it, even if the organization is structured in a way where you're not getting plugged into those decisions, and it's trying to figure out how we can get plugged in and how we can influence those decisions. And I've explained a lot of concepts with a diagram like this. And in general, I would say that's one of the main takeaways I want you guys to have from this program, which is that everything is connected to everything. And the more you understand this huge web of strategies and concepts and how they connect together, the better it will be. And pricing is one of those things that unifies all different functions, because everybody's decision-making is impacted by the margin we make on a customer. And just some examples of this, like in product, if we're high price versus low price, it impacts what kind of value we need to deliver. Like an enterprise CRM needs to deliver a different value than a lightweight CRM that might be priced at $10 per seat, right? Marketing, it guides our go-to-market and efficiency and how we measure it. Sales, it impacts our sales cycle. CS, it influences how much attention we can give to customers, how many resources we can put into onboarding them and retaining them. And then on the engineering side, it affects what kind of underlying system and architecture and infrastructure we have in place, right? An enterprise level security company, as an example, the engineering would look very different than like a small tool that helps you block or filter your emails in Gmail, right? And even though they're both in the security space. So understanding that, and then just some examples to kind of bring that to life, like product impact, like this is Monday. Monday is one of the most simple project management tools to use, and their pricing reflects that. You could start for free. You could just start running your projects. If you're running a small business, you probably never need to upgrade to the basic plan, and you can run your small business just through a couple of boards. And their product ease of use and how much they've invested in it is a big part of how they go to market with that. And Monday actually spends more on marketing than probably most SaaS companies that you know. They probably spend close to $100 million a year on just paid media. I've heard crazy numbers through the grapevine. I think it's north of 50 million for sure, and maybe 80 to 100 million. So, and that's because the market that they're targeting is so large and product has such a huge role because of the pricing strategy they decided to go with. They're not competing with the NetSuites of the world to get those types of customers away. On the flip side, like marketing also gets impacted by this, right? So this is Hotjar, and they have like a surveys platform, and you can see that they have an entire section of their site dedicated to survey templates, and probably it ranks for all the different survey templates, like a Net Promoter Score survey. They probably rank for that in terms of SEO. They probably advertise for it. Same thing for exit intent or other types of surveys that you can offer to your customers. And then once you come in, you use the template or you have a content upgrade, and then you get into the basic plan, and it's free and you can get started right away. And then on the flip side, you have a large company like ADP, and even for 1 to 49 employees, which is a fairly small business, this is their pricing page. And the number of times get pricing is on the page is outlandish. And then even there's a phone number to get a quote. So in order to even get a price at this level, they're willing to put a rep behind the process so you can call this number to get a pricing quote so they can capture your information and follow up with you, because the deal size is large enough and recurring enough, and they know once you join ADP, you're never leaving, because as long as your business is active, you're going to need to use their payroll system. So they're willing to put those types of resources behind it. And then on the flip side, you have Help Scout, which is more of like a cheaper competitor to Zendesk, if you will. And they invest a ton into classes and onboarding pre-trial. So they have classes scheduled basically every day on how to use their product. And somebody's actually servicing that. And those outcomes are influenced by their decision to price so low. And you can see, like, comparing us to Zendesk, like Help Scout is $205 and Zendesk is $675. So it's 1/3 the cost. So how do they acquire customers cheap enough to be able to compete when they still have to spend the same amount on Google Ads or anything else that they're investing into? And this is a big part of that. And then finally, engineering, like just a simple example that a lot of people here are probably familiar with, is having the ecosystem of products, especially if you're in a platform company, look and feel the same and be integrated into a cloud platform together like Microsoft is. All of those things take effort from the engineering side so that we can have bundled pricing, so that we can sell Microsoft Teams and Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office all together under one price. And so just bringing this point to life, which is that everything is connected to everything. And we as marketing leaders need to understand the role of pricing as we're making all of these decisions. And when a pricing decision is made, part of your job is to interface with the rest of the company to make sure that they're doing their part to bring the pricing strategy to life. Coming back to this Help Scout example, if we know our price points are low, we as the marketing team need to make sure that customer success is doing everything they can to onboard customers in a one-to-many approach and as frequently as possible, so that people try the product and start a trial and are actually successful and end up setting up certain help articles or quick responses to live chat or whatever it is inside the product. And so for each of these, marketing needs to push for that. And if I was inside ADP, I would push for not having get pricing everywhere here. As an example, I think this is a mistake. There is a way for them to have a self-serve option here, which is kind of ridiculous. But that shows you, like, not every even large companies are not optimized, right? This company has probably done a ton of pricing research, and yet this page looks like this. To me, marketing needs to not just say, okay, we'll accept that this is our sales process and we implement this. No, we actually need a way to get their information faster than just requesting pricing. And so the idea is that as the marketing leader, you must have access to full transparency into the pricing strategy and then influence over it with all the key stakeholders that are involved to be able to influence those decisions. And this is where I want to shift the conversation to more fundamental things, because in order to be able to do that, we actually need to understand how pricing works, how good products are priced, what works and what doesn't. And when I meet marketing leaders or just leaders in general, pricing is one of those things that's very misunderstood. And it's because like foundational stuff is not there. So if you've gone to business school, like some of this stuff is going to feel like first year classes, but it's necessary to kind of get through this stuff. So basics of economics, like you have a supply curve and you have a demand curve, and the point at which they intersect is where the price and the amount you have to sell kind of match up, and that ends up being like a point of equilibrium. So you have enough to supply those customers and enough customers that want the product, and so you don't have excess in supply or surplus, and you don't have a shortage. And so this ends up being like the ideal point to sell something and how you kind of want to price it. I'd say most SaaS companies do not understand their point of equilibrium. SaaS companies, B2B companies, services companies do not understand their point of equilibrium, because one way or another, they either create a shortage on the supply side. On the demand side, there's too many people that want it and they're priced too low, or they have a surplus on the supply side because they price too high. And so it's really understanding, or they have the wrong pricing model. And we'll get into that in a little bit as well. So it's really understanding what is the right model, what is the right price point, and given the current context of your company, what would be the right way to make sure that your pricing is not a deterrent to closing a deal. And a couple of additional ways to think about this. There's elastic versus inelastic demand. And what elasticity means is how much does demand shift based on price? So certain things are super elastic, and those would be things that you would be very price sensitive on. And that could be things at a grocery store or something that is more transactional. And then certain things are inelastic, like healthcare. One way or another, you have to go to the family doctor, or you may need to go to the dentist. And so it's trying to figure out for your product, how sensitive to price is the customer's response? How mission critical is your software or solution to who you're selling to? And then the flip side of this is how elastic or inelastic is your supply? And in most software companies, your supply is basically inelastic. You have infinite amount that you can sell because it's just another instance of your product. You don't need to stand up a new product entirely. You're not selling actual packaged goods. So it's quite inelastic. But if you, let's say, are selling software with services or just services, then your supply is kind of elastic. Like if I suddenly have a huge bump in demand, and because I reduce my price point, I just don't have enough supply to fill that because I don't have enough staff on hand in order to be able to do this. So between those two things, we have to understand what type of a market environment we're living in, and what also we're facing in terms of competition, and how much leeway we have to work with pricing without compromising conversion rates and retention and churn and everything else that goes along with the growth engine of the business. So one way to kind of think about this is, on the left side, you have low ACV and high TAM businesses. And on the right side, you have high ACV and limited TAM businesses. In most cases, you're going to find that if you have a low ACV, high TAM company, it's basically a repetitive product. You don't need services layered on top of that. So you have pretty inelastic supply, but your demand is very elastic. So something like Monday.com, if they were to increase their prices by 50%, they would see a severe drop in how many people are actually interested in buying what they have to sell. Conversely, if you did that as Salesforce, you wouldn't have that issue, right? So Salesforce would be more on this side, where you might have this throttle on supply based on how many implementation partners you have or how much you can support clients to get onboarded into the solution. But demand will be fairly inelastic, because once someone implements Salesforce, they're not going anywhere, and it's pretty mission critical, right? And this is one of the reasons why, and we can talk about strategy, but is like one of the reasons why a company like Salesforce has a huge implementation partner network is because of this problem. So the more enterprise you are, you run into this issue of, well, we can't keep hiring staff internally to help customers get onboarded onto the software. So we can actually, instead of paying it on a fixed cost basis, it's almost like, let's empower our implementation partner. We don't have to pay them anything, and they make money on a variable basis. Whenever we have more customers, they have more people to service. They win, we win, it all works out. And we're able to handle the increased demand with flexible supply. And so knowing which market you're in, you can start to see how decisions come about from that. And the Salesforce example is just one instance of that, but there's plenty more we can reference based on kind of what type of supply and demand curve your company may have in particular. And this would be like an interesting homework assignment for you, is to try to think about how elastic or inelastic your company's supplier demand would be and what type of leeway there is from a pricing perspective. Okay, so that's foundational stuff. So the next thing is, with the understanding of that, we have to then think about, how does pricing impact actually closing a deal? And I'd say there's 4 things that go into closing a deal. One is it an urgent enough problem? Is it a scarce? 2, is it a scarce enough problem? Is there high value in solving this problem? And 4th, am I willing to pay to solve this problem? Out of all 4 of these things, so urgency and scarcity will get the deal over the line, yes, but the most important, and values obviously is important because I have a problem, is this valuable enough to solve? Yes, but the most important one is this one, which is, am I willing to pay to solve this problem? And you may have thousands of problems in your life that you want to solve, but you're not willing to pay someone to solve it. And I'll give you just side example, like there's tons of these meal delivery services, and the biggest issue they face, like Chef's Plate and Factor and all these guys, biggest issue they face is churn, because people have this problem. I don't have enough time to cook. I want to buy food so I want to eat healthy. This is reasonable enough, I can subscribe to it. And so they might buy, but then very quickly they realize this is either not good quality food, or it's not coming when I want it, or I want different types of food. I want variety. I want to make it myself. It's too expensive, whatever it is. And eventually they cancel. And so the point being here that even if you buy something, especially in a B2B environment where you have this recurring subscription and churn rates are so important and LTV is so important, we have to be able to overcome this objection constantly, because it's always sitting there. Which is, do I want to keep paying for this or no? And like, I'll give you an example of something that we do internally, like with Donald, our CEO, we'll always make a list of all the subscriptions that we've got, and should we continue using it for the next year, and whether or not we should cancel. So this willingness to pay question is one that you're going to have to overcome. And one good way to kind of, or model that helps figure this out, is called the Van Westendorp model. And I always mispronounce that, so I got it right there. I'm pretty proud of myself. But it gives this framework where it says, what you want to do is you want to figure out, like you want to geofence almost what the price should be. So on one side, it'll be too expensive. On one side, it'll be too cheap. On one side, it'll be considered expensive, but yeah, I'm willing to buy it. And on the other side, it might be cheap but good value, like willing to buy that it's good quality. So the questions are like, what price is so expensive that you would not purchase it? What price is so low that you don't trust the quality? What price is starting to get expensive but you'd still buy the product? What price is considered a bargain, right? So when we kind of have the fencing around pricing for a particular product, you end up with a chart that looks something like this. For every product or service, you could probably model something like this out. And this model has its flaws, but it gives a pretty good idea of what your price range should be. And in particular, if you look at these 2 points, what it signals is the point at which something is too expensive and not expensive. There are just as many people involved on both sides. And then on the side where it's too cheap or not too cheap, and it's also even there. And the price point between those 2 is the price range that you can sell at. And inside most companies, I would argue that most of your products are somewhere here. Some might even be here, where like your big bargain for what you're selling. And very rarely you'll come across a company that's on the higher end of this number. And then these other 2 points here are, I'd say it's like a point of equilibrium. And this point is considered the optimal price point, where considered too cheap and too expensive are the same number of people. So that means you found an optimal price point, because the people that think it's too cheap won't buy, and the people that think it's too expensive won't buy, but there'll be a bunch of other people that buy. So you'll end up getting the most number of customers. And whichever way you go outside of that, you will lose revenue one way or another, because some people will find it too cheap or too expensive. And as a basic example, like I was talking to some friends last week, and they were debating what's a good rate to pay a babysitter. And someone was saying they paid $18 an hour. Somebody said they paid $12 an hour. Should we tip our babysitter? Should we not tip our babysitter? And this is a bit like to look at those guardrails, right? Too expensive might be $50 an hour. Too cheap might be $5 an hour. I don't want to leave my kid with somebody that's making $5 an hour. Like, it's my kid, right? And then expensive and premium might be $25 an hour, and cheap and good value might be $10 an hour. So likely the optimal price point, it's somewhere between $15 to $20 an hour. And I think an important question to ask inside your company is, are we within this optimal price range or between these two ranges? And where are we? Because one of the things companies are often get nervous about doing, even marketers, is raising prices. But especially if you're on this side, you have so much more value to capture by increasing your prices from existing customers and from new customers that it shouldn't be overlooked. And it's more of a science than what I've described here. And I'll get into some more numbers in a bit. But this is the kind of survey that you would want to run to get to understand, like, what is something that someone is willing to pay, right? And the ultimate test is actually if they're willing to pull out their credit card and actually make the transaction. But this type of methodology will at least help you get to a closer answer. And the idea is that if you get this right, you'll dramatically improve your conversion rates, your retention rates, your LTV, and you want to make decisions that help you maximize that. There are a bunch of different pricing models we can also implement, right? There's one of the things that a lot of people hear about is like cost plus pricing. It's like, whatever your cost base is, add some margin on top of that, 15%, 30%, whatever it is, and that'll be how you price. Another is penetration pricing, which is like, third is competitive pricing, be at roughly what market is pricing a product at. And the last is value-based pricing. I'm a big believer in value-based pricing. That's how we price everything at How to SaaS. And I think a lot of companies don't price that way, and it's a huge mistake. Every piece of literature you will read on pricing will tell you that value-based pricing is the best approach. It's not just me saying it, especially in B2B and SaaS companies. Like, you don't really have a cost base. It's like, once you develop the product, what's your marginal cost? It's nothing. And then if you try to price on parity, you're going to basically look like a commodity in the marketplace. And then if you try to heavily discount, it'll be hard to spend more cost of acquisition to acquire the customer, especially in competitive markets. So you are at a disadvantage in these three models in most cases. And in value-based pricing, you can actually maximize how much you get from the customer for the value you actually bring. And that gives you the most amount of margin so that you can actually go invest it into your marketing efforts. Actually, shout out to Donald. He wrote a book. He's on our team as our COO. He wrote a book called Breaking the Time Barrier, which is about this. So with FreshBooks, so we're checking that out. I should have actually plugged that for you, Donald. Anyways, the point is that value-based pricing, with that, what you're actually saying is, what is the value you're going to get out of this? And because we have put in and covered in other sessions, the product marketing work and the positioning work to distinguish ourselves from competitors, we're not even playing in the same market as competitors. So why would we price the same way? In a way, for example, you could run a project inside Monday and you can run it in Jira, but they're priced very differently, right? So why does somebody choose Jira over Monday? Well, it's because they have different features, different ICPs, different messaging, different positioning. And so Jira can charge more, right? And so having that confidence in the value that you're bringing to your ICP and knowing what your retention rates are and who your best fit customers are, then you can lean more into value-based pricing, which I think is super important. So, and this is an example of how all these ideas connect together, because if you're not confident in that, if you don't know who your best fit customer is, if you don't know where you win or which features or what your differentiators are, then you kind of are left with no choice but to try to compete on price. And you never want to compete on price, because that's always a race to the bottom and that'll always crush your margins. So you don't want to do that. Next is choosing the right pricing model. So as like when I said, this is the philosophy or the approach. So we should maybe call this approach. And this I would classify as choosing the right pricing model in terms of how users actually grow their account or grow their spend with you. And I'd say there's two main models. One is subscription-based and the other is pay-per-use. That's really worth suggesting. And inside these, there's a subset of metrics or ways to measure how an account would expand. So on the subscription side, it's about either more seats or more activity. And on the pay-per-use side, it's more usage or more outputs. And you could potentially also have pay-per-use related to activity and subscription related to usage. And I'll show you guys some examples of that as well. In most cases, I would say having just one of these four be the main metric as how customers spend more with you is not good enough. Because what's going to end up happening over time is you're going to leave a lot of value on the table. You want a mechanism to expand customers beyond just the primary dimension of seats and also tied to activity. And you can probably see this inside of a lot of the subscriptions that you guys invest in, where they have more than one type of filter to determine that. Like, here's an example. This is Zapier, and I just picked a random number. I said, okay, I need 1 million tasks per month. And you can see that they have 4 plans with different types of features, different number of users and for this. And then, but if I change this to like 10,000 tasks, all these numbers change. Another example is HubSpot. Like, if most people here are probably on HubSpot, you have number of seats, you have number of emails, you have number of contacts. So it gives like multiple ways to upgrade from the starter platform to the professional platform. And then they also have bundles on top of that. So you could theoretically start in starter and very quickly realize, I need to send way more emails than I have right now, or I need to upload my contact database and I can't do that because I max out at 1,000 contacts. And you can see how pricing would escalate very quickly that way. Here's another example, SEMrush, where they're increasing their pricing based on number of projects. But they also say number of projects, number of keywords to track. So even if you have 5 projects, but you have 1,500 keywords to track, you can't be on the pro plan. And so that gives you a mechanism to expand your account over time as well. And this one is a little less complicated because at the end of the day, it's like a research tool. So you'll have less filters. I think probably the best example of this is HubSpot more than anything, because there's like multiple ways to escalate a client to a larger plan. Okay, so with that, the question is, well, the model that we choose, how do we know that that's the right model for the business? And I really like the perceived value framework. And I actually linked the article. There's a guy who wrote an article on this, which I have to credit because it's awesome. And I would have liked to have drawn this drawing myself, but he did a better job. So I have to give credit where it's due. Is if you think about how something is priced, you have the cost, which goes into like the suppliers of that product. Then you have what the price that you charge for that product. And that's what the company makes in terms of their profit. And then you have the perceived value of that product, and that's what the consumer makes. If your perceived value is lower than your price, you will never close a deal. If your perceived value is basically on where the price is, even then it would be hard to close a deal because the consumer will feel like, I'm paying exactly what this is worth. Like, could I get better value for my money elsewhere? In most cases, you want your perceived value to be greater than your price, because then the consumer feels like, even though they're paying you whatever the sum of money is, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, they're the ones getting the good deal because they would not be able to capture this much value otherwise. Because even if they went another route, there's no way to capture this much value. So this is where pricing and positioning come very close together, because you have to cross this threshold. And in a way, you could combine this section with a product marketing section to really explain how to close a deal and how to explain this to consumers, because they have to feel like when they're making that purchasing decision with you, they're going to capture way more value than what they're paying. And if you don't cross that threshold, they're not going to buy. And another diagram from this guy is this concept of activation energy. Like, when you make a purchase, like we talked about during the sales session, the biggest competitor you'll ever have is no decision, because there's always this huge amount of inertia that someone needs to overcome before they buy from you. So you kind of like need to nudge them along, like we discussed, to make a decision. And that requires some activation energy. Like, okay, yeah, like Nike, just do it. Go buy some running shoes. Now you actually have to go run every morning, right? So same thing, like, what is the activation energy required to take on this project of adopting a new system, uploading all my projects, adding new team members, onboarding them onto the platform? It's a lot of headache to take on. So this part of creating this activation energy, this is what we do during product marketing, is convincing them that the effort will actually be worth it. What ends up happening in a lot of companies is, I believe I'm going to receive this much value when I make this purchase, and then I actually buy the thing and I get less value than I wanted. And so you have like this scenario where I thought my perceived value was here when I made the purchase, but it actually ended up being here. So now I'm at a loss. And if you look at most of your NPS detractors, they will have had this experience. They will have felt like they're buying something that is more valuable because maybe even your product marketing was too good and your product actually sucked, right? And so this is where, as marketers, if you just look at this part of product marketing and building up the perceived value and convincing them to buy and doing all the sales stuff and getting the deal over the line, and then your product stinks, like over time, your company is going to slow down. And this happens inside of a lot of businesses where there is all this activity. Salesforce is a great example of this, by the way. Great company, great product. Mark Benioff is an awesome CEO, but in a lot of ways, the product sucks. Like a lot of people hate Salesforce because it's so clunky. It's hard to use. Like you have to kind of set up a lot of stuff in order to get the most out of it. And so a lot of people on Salesforce feel this, but they can't leave also because it has this mission critical element to the product. What you actually want is whatever the perceived value is over time and help the customer get onto the platform, their expectations are surpassed and they actually have the surplus that comes about from your product over delivering. And the more of this you have, the more there'll be referrals, the more there'll be NPS promoters, the more LTV will be higher, the more net revenue retention will be higher, and then the more we can spend to increase our perceived value on product marketing and demand gen and content and all the things that we've talked about so far. And so this is why marketing being plugged into the pricing strategy and then also the value product is delivering. Like as a marketing and salesperson, I would be pushing product all the time to make sure we are over delivering. If we have an NPS rating of like 10%, that means like until we get that up to 30, 40%, there's like no other work to do because we have to nail that because everything else will start turning faster if we get that right. And so connecting this now to LTV, right? If we choose this type of a pricing model and we actually nail this part right, over time, we're going to have more expansion and increases in LTV. So good forms of expansion would be like more seats, more usage, more outputs, more integrations, things like that. And then you'll see decreases in LTV where sometimes you're paying a recurring subscription for something that's one-time value. Maybe it's pay as you go, but you're getting recurring value. Sometimes it's like seat-based pricing when usage is not factored in or vice versa. And so the user feels like I'm paying more than the value I'm receiving. And so then LTV declines over time. And I'll give you guys an example of this. Like we actually just got off a call with PitchBook on their pricing. And we're a management consulting firm. We're not a large private equity group, but we use PitchBook because we work with private equity groups for research. And PitchBook is bloody expensive. It's like roughly $30,000 a year. And so every year we have a negotiating battle with them to say, dude, we do not, like they said, their normal price point for the plan that we're on today, they told us was $50,000. There's no way we would pay $50,000 for the size of company that we are. And so it's super valuable to what we do, but at $50,000, it kind of violates this price versus perceived value for us because we'll just get that data from somewhere else. Why would I use PitchBook if I can solve for this in a different way with a cheaper subscription? So there's a threshold after which it no longer makes sense for us, even though it's a good product. Another example is Netflix. A lot of folks on our team like Love is Blind as an example. And one thing that's interesting about Netflix's churn rate is that it's actually really good for a streaming service and a content platform. And one of the reasons why, and obviously it's more shared domain, so everybody understands this, is the amount of content that they're releasing. But just one thing to just put on your radar, there's a way to think about it is you're not really subscribed to Netflix. You're actually paying like $2 a month to be a Love is Blind subscriber, another $2 a month to be a Drive to Survive subscriber, and another $2 a month to get access to sporting events, and some percentage going to maybe movies and other things. A good example of this is when Game of Thrones ended, HBO saw its subscriptions plummet because everybody was subscribed just for Game of Thrones. So it was more of a Game of Thrones subscription than an HBO subscription. Another example is Peloton, and they have this perceived value versus actual value issue as well, because you have to subscribe to their paid fitness app as part of their hardware. And you can see that their monthly paid app subscription churn is like 9%, which is wild. That basically means over a year, they have to replace this entire user base because 100%, like 9 times 12 is 108%. So they have to replace their entire subscriber base every year. And then when you look at the connected fitness app, it's 2% a month, which means it's about 24% of users are churning that they have to replace. That's way too high, right? So even Peloton has done well in the last couple of years because they've optimized some things and improved their cost structures. But it's just, again, like at the end of the day, it's a fitness equipment company, but it's selling this as a subscription. And then the customer is like, I just want the equipment. I don't want to pay for this. And so they don't end up staying on the platform, and then you see revenue go down on that side. And so as the more you understand the perceived value versus the actual value of your solution, the more you can actually drive growth with pricing. And the reason all of this exposition is important is because one of the most important levers to grow companies is pricing increases. This is a study done by McKinsey, which shows that for every 1% increase in price, you increase profits by 6%. Whereas if you improve variable costs, it only improves it by 3.8%. If you improve fixed costs, it's like 1% equals 1%. So you get a 6-to-1 return on your profit with changes in pricing. So if you look at most value creation plans inside private equity firms or investors, I can tell you, without even looking at it, I already know what's in there. It's one of these 7 things. It's pricing, it's go-to-market strategy, sales efficiency, upsell, cross-sell, marketing performance, org redesign, executive team. Some variation of this exists inside, and M&A would probably be the last one, which we'll talk about next week. So some variation of this exists, and out of all of these, the quickest way to drive more EBITDA and margin expansion is pricing. And so the better you understand all these fundamentals inside your business, the more you can then size the opportunity and roll out the right type of pricing change or the right type of pricing strategy that helps you grow your business. And so that's why I kind of want you guys to understand that, because the answer inside each of your companies is going to look very different because your business models are different, your markets are different, you may have different services you're layering on or different components, maybe you have add-on pricing, like it's just going to be very different. And so I want you guys to think about it in the right way. And then here's a simple example in terms of how you start to size the opportunity. And we can spend some Q&A on this because depending on your situation, the answer might be different. But in this example, you have 4 types of plans: starter, pro, team, enterprise. You have the number of users here, how much they're paying per year here, how much revenue they contribute. So total 32 million in revenue. And then I modeled out a 20% increase in pricing. I modeled a churn risk based on type of customer. Then I looked at the new number of users, so it shrinks from 3,600 to 2,974. But you can see that the revenue grows from 32 million to 35 million. And they lose money on the starter segment, but they gain revenue everywhere else. They actually end up adding 3 million across all the other segments combined with the loss in the starter segment. The reason this is important, and this is connected to what we talked about in TAM and segmentation and product marketing, you would especially roll this out if you found out that your LTV on the starter users was not great, or maybe their NPS ratings was not good, or maybe they don't expand as often in terms of buying other products and services or upsell and cross-sell. And you could segment this out in many different ways. You could do it by geography. You could do it by size of account. You could do it by vertical. And you could roll out different types of pricing increases based on usage and other things. And so it's more of a simplified model, but I'd say definitely get involved into this process. I was talking to somebody on our podcast yesterday, and the episode actually ended up being about ops teams and private equity firms. And this person used to work at Simon Kucher, and they were a pricing expert. And he was saying that pricing is one of those things that inside companies, you don't do it that often. You do it maybe once a year, and it's like a 1-month project. And then after that, it's not needed. So nobody actually internally ends up hiring a pricing expert, which is 100% accurate. In most companies, there's not really like a director of pricing or head of pricing type of title or role filled out. And so that's one of the reasons why the private equity firm or investors end up taking on that task, or maybe your chief revenue officer is doing it or your CEO is doing it. And so what I'd encourage you guys to do is, if that seat doesn't exist, it's a huge opportunity to actually try to model some of this stuff out and figure out how much opportunity sits inside your existing user base. And I can almost guarantee if you haven't rolled out a pricing increase in a while, there's probably 20 to 30% additional revenue sitting there if you do it right. You'll lose some customers, but you're going to gain a lot more in terms of revenue. And your mix of customers, this is another thing I wanted to explain, is like, it might be that previously your percentage of your base here might be 55% and it declines to 50%. And that's okay if this is not the best fit customer that you would want, because their net revenue retention is actually not great. And then your best fit customers actually improve because they have better net revenue retention and they're a bigger percentage of your base. And so your revenue concentration is getting higher inside those best fit segments of customers. So whatever your variation is, I would love to talk through that. If you guys want to ping me by email, this is one of the, I'd say, follow-ups that if you guys want to do, happy to chat about it. Just ping me and say, here's kind of what I'm looking at. What do you think? And we can chat about that as well. And then as you roll out pricing increases, one of the things that comes about is that there's churn, like we just talked about. So there are things that you can do to minimize that. And I've shown some examples and just talked about the concept a little bit here as well. So one is tying the pricing increase with additional value that you're providing. And this is where value-based pricing is super important as well. Like at Wild Apricot back in the day, we did a pricing increase in like 2018, and it was a nonprofit software, so you could do your website and events and things like that. And we released a new module where these nonprofits could sell T-shirts and other things on their website to fundraise for their nonprofit. So it was like an e-commerce module so that they wouldn't have to invest in a Shopify or something else. And so we released that module and increased their prices by 30 to 40%. And that basically helped minimize churn because they're getting all this additional value without necessarily layering on another tool. You can also grandfather your existing customers to make sure that they don't feel like they're being blindsided or not getting the benefit of being loyal or being part of the business from earlier on. Obviously, having a clear communication plan, and I'll touch on that in a second. And then having continued investment in brand and content. And this part I'll say is understated because it's kind of invisible. When you determine your pricing strategy, it's kind of hard to tell if you've invested in your brand or product enough or if you're worth that much in terms of whatever your price point is. But as you invest more in brand and content, you're going to be perceived very differently from the rest of the market, and you're going to be able to charge more in the marketplace. So you kind of have this like halo effect, which gives you more cushion to raise your prices. Whereas other companies actually should have had an elasticity chart versus brand and content. Like the more you invest in brand, the more inelastic your demand is because you can actually charge more for your service. I will make that a future drawing. In terms of rolling out your pricing increase, just some examples. So this is Adobe. The way they kind of explain this is they say, look, hey, we're going to be increasing your prices, but just want to say the reason we're doing this is that currency exchange rates have fluctuated a ton over the last years. And this is one of the reasons why it's going to be increasing starting in March of 2017. Another example, I'm a Wealthsimple customer, and recently the Bank of Canada rates came down. And so they lowered the interest rate that my bank account will pay to me. And it's like, this is a legitimate reason. There's macroeconomic environments and that's impacting our decisions. And so that's the reality of it. And I just have to kind of accept it. And the more you communicate the circumstance to your customers, the better it will be. If you're just communicating a price increase without explaining why, you're far more likely to come up on resistance. But an explanation like this is enough for me to be like, yeah, that's fair. Like, I'm not going to fight you on it. Here's another example. This is from Netflix. You guys have all gotten emails like this. But the interesting thing that I like is this middle paragraph here, where they said that this will allow us to deliver even more value with more stories or movies or whatever it is that they're going to bring. And with that, it's like, yeah, that's exactly why I am subscribed to Netflix. So you can continue bringing me stories that uplift me and make me feel good about myself, right? So makes sense. Here's another one, Front. They sent a similar email, but they list out in more detail, like what you'll get access to, latest features or knowledge base, rules, experience, et cetera, et cetera. And you're like, yeah, okay, you can increase my prices. It makes sense. The one thing I don't like about this email is they say over here, depending on the price you pay today, transitioning to this new plan might do XYZ. In most cases, so that's one of the reasons I included this example. You want to be as specific as possible to the customer about exactly how their life will change. This shows lack of customization. So with pricing rollouts, I would be way more specific so that you minimize the type of backlash you get. And then this email, I think, is probably the best one of them all. This is from Notion, and they explain exactly what's changing, what additional stuff I'm going to be getting, pricing updates, and when it's going to happen and everything else. So this will be in the deck, worth checking that out later as well. And the last thing is to say that marketing has a critical role to play as we think about overall pricing strategy, and we've been talking about it throughout. But especially on the positioning side, I think there's a book with this title or an article or something, but it's called Pricing is Positioning. So how you're perceived by the market is entirely based on what you're priced at in a lot of cases. And this is a simple example. Like we see these Gartner quadrants all the time, and oftentimes you'll find that, first of all, I think these things are horseshit for the most part, but sometimes you'll find that items that are on the top right are the most enterprise solutions because they also have the most money, but also because they are the most enterprise and priced the highest. If you think about like even B2C brands and things like that we pay for, the most expensive brands are, yes, they're expensive because they might be high quality or sourced ethically and all this other stuff, but also because they're priced high, that is part of their product marketing. So as you understand that, like you start to see that you're making a conscious decision when you price in terms of how you're going to go to market and talk to your customers and explain things to them. And a good way to kind of think about this is like in every market. So like this is e-commerce. You have Shopify that's often like mostly SMB. It's more a little bit up market now because they have Shopify Plus. We have BigCommerce is actually a customer of ours. And then you have enterprise clients or enterprise solutions like Salesforce that can also do e-commerce. Then you have project management here. Then you have like accounting software here. And in most cases, like, yeah, this is one way to splice this market where you have SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. The other ways to kind of think about this is like, this is the ease of use category. This is like, okay, I'm a bigger organization. I need more capabilities than just some of the basics. And this is like the complex or clunky market and how we're positioned. And so you have to really determine which of these, and the buckets can be very different depending on your market, but which bucket you want to actually live in and who you're actually going to be competing with and who the customer is and how you're positioning. And pricing is such a big part of that because if you're low priced, you better be easy to use because your user is not as sophisticated and doesn't have as many resources, right? Whereas if you're on this side, you can afford to be a little bit more clunky because your users do have resources and they will hire Salesforce consultants to help them implement a new instance of Salesforce. And so part of the work that has to be done here, it's like, if you kind of think about 4 categories, like a discount option, a good value option, a premium option, a luxury option. On the left side, you have low margins, but you have to sell high volume. And on the right side, you have high margins and low volume. And the more you invest in brand and product, you can kind of move your company from the left side to the right side. Another thing you can do, which I don't have on this slide, and I was trying to figure out how to explain this, is like you could be the discount brand, but you could push up how much demand your product has by investing in your strategy and your brand and product the more you do it. So an example would be like IKEA. Like they are the discount furniture brand, but it's such an amazing brand that they do a ton of volume because of that. So the branding doesn't just move this way, it also moves up this way in terms, I would probably have demand on the left side here or revenue in terms of how much you can generate the more you invest into your brand. And so then the last thing is, we've seen this triangle in multiple sessions. It's just, in this case, when we talk about positioning and messaging, to me, we've talked about products so far and we talked about go-to-market strategy. The third piece is pricing. And that's how all of these things kind of come together to help you build your positioning in the marketplace, to distinguish yourself and actually win. And so as marketers, like what I'd encourage you as you're leaving this session and doing some of the homework and thinking about your business is really looking at it as a significant enterprise value driver and how you can move the needle on EBITDA by thinking about pricing more, even though you're in the marketing seat, and how you can grow the business more for yourselves and your respective companies. So with that said, I'll stop there.